I know our friends down south are thankful, but up here in the Great White North, we're thankful too for, well, what's been a pretty busy 24 hours in the CFL apart from the Toronto Argonauts getting their 19th Grey Cup. I have to mention that because it's the first time I've recorded since. But the big news I want to get into first before anything is with the Argonauts. What do we feel about the hiring of just one DC instead of keeping Fields and Iben on? Like, and do we think there's a chance they stay on staff, or do you think they probably go elsewhere?
Not surprised. The reason why I'm not surprised, actually, it's funny because I totally missed that Arash Badani had reported this a week ago, or sorry, a month ago, right? I think it's twofold here. Ryan, we know Ryan Dinwiddie has many relationships with coaches from his time in Calgary and things like that, and I don't think I don't think it's as much of an indictment on the job as Fields and what Fields and Kevin Iben did. I think it's more so what that relationship with Monson, with Brent Monson, obviously the new coordinator now, and having that one guy, right? Two guys in the role, just it was always something that was weird for a lot of people. And look, that defense had its ups and downs, right? It wasn't. They found ways at the right time to get hot, make plays, but at the same time, there were some flaws with that defense. They did a good job coaching players. I think Kevin Iben and Will Fields are both great positional coaches. I thought maybe at one point that Kevin Iben would eventually be a D coordinator, but for some guys, it might not be in the cards. I don't know. I'm interested. I don't know what exactly it means for the rest of them, but I do think that I can understand why the move was made. I know some people are confused about it, but Dinwiddie has always been a big believer of if he's got a great relationship with someone, he knows their quality of work, he's going to bring them on. And we saw that with Corey Mace. Worked out pretty good when they had Corey Mace here. Now I think it's going to work even better with when they bring Brent over. Also, Frank, those bricks look a little familiar. Those are literally the same bricks as my house.
Yeah, I know.
Are you trying? Are you trying to say this is?
It's a picture of the side of your house. Sorry, I didn't mean to distract you. I just didn't like that picture. It didn't look good with the beard.
See, Frank is this is Frank's messaging about the Argos defense now. It's going to be a brick wall. Nothing.
I was just about to say.
Well, yeah, okay. Let's go with that, even though that was never the intent, but I like it. Works for me.
My main thing about the DC is I think it's just, look, he just wants to lock one guy down for the role. And I think instead of choosing either Fields or Iben and, damaging potentially one relationship, where it's like, hey, it's basically saying you trust one guy over the other. It's kind of, he gets to bring in his own guy, gets to bring in there. And the one big point, too, with this defense is hopefully he can clean up some of the errors on second and long there, something Frank and I have talked about. And I know Frank's spoken to Dinwiddie about at length.
Yeah, I mean, there's something to be said about someone who's had the experience in the role, right? Yeah. He's been the DC there since 2019. And I don't think Calgary's defense has been bad either. It's been one of the top defenses, even though the team hasn't had a lot of success lately. I don't think that's been the issue of the defense. I think that's been more so talent and offense and quarterback. We'll get to that a little later. But I look at this. Yeah, I think when you see a guy like that available, I guarantee with some of the new hires that are going to happen around the league, someone like Monson wasn't going to make it to another team, right? Like to the Argos. He was going to make it to somewhere else. Ottawa had an opening, right? I think this was Toronto being proactive and saying there's other teams that have openings. We need to jump in on this.
Kind of like what St. Louis, just a different sport, but what St. Louis just did in hockey with Jim Montgomery.
Exactly.
Yeah, But I think what you've got here is you've got a case of I agree the experienced nature of the new DC, and I think they have a chance to keep probably one of the two that were here, if they can fit into the staff. One thing about Ryan Dinwiddie and this Argos regime, they're not afraid to do something that
they'll step on their toes if they have to.
A lot of teams won't do. Like, how many teams will release a quarterback if I can keep it to the subject of the Grey Cup, how many teams will release a quarterback, bring him back, and they come back to win a Grey Cup? This is something that I find with this regime, that the Argos are very good at. We talked about Calgary. Ironically, we're talking about Calgary here too. The plug and play thing has become a real strength of the Toronto Argonauts. The plug and play thing on the defense, they lost 8 guys. You wouldn't know it. You'd know that they were struggling, and some might suggest it was the coaching was the only reason why they struggled, because they had the manpower to do it. And we did see throughout the season a real dynamic defense, and one that I think, will it get better with Monson? Maybe it'll get better. But one thing I do know, that with Ryan Dinwiddie, he's very loyal, but he's also most loyal to the team as a whole, if I can use it that way, if I can say it that way. I think he really he symbolizes playing for the logo in the front, if I can use a hockey term, the logo in the front, then the name on the back. And the name on the back can come back. That's what we're hearing, right? We hear that. We know that that's quite possible if you fit in. And I think the other thing I'm going to say is, I think they let Arbuckle go because he had the wrong attitude. Why do I say that? Because throughout the Grey Cup, he kept admitting he had a wrong attitude. Mm-hmm. And he was basically signaling that Dinwiddie understood that he had a bad attitude. And what he's grateful for with Dinwiddie, why he loves Dinwiddie so much, and I don't think I'm exaggerating, is that Dinwiddie judges you for who you are, not who you were, not who you will be, who you are. And because he trusted him with who he was, he full-throated supported him to be the quarterback in the Grey Cup. And I think Arbuckle believed him and knew he was telling the truth, because Arbuckle knows that Dinwiddie isn't just going to say he likes you just to keep you around.
Well, I know. I do think that when you look at the way the Argonauts have operated, right, they, as you said, like they recognize culture, right? Culture is a big part of, I think, what has allowed this team to have this success under Ryan Dinwiddie. They talked a lot about it. And I think it's, again, they stole some people I have heard, some people say, oh, they stole the Calgary culture. I was like,
yeah.
Well, I wouldn't say they stole it. They brought it over in with the people that understood the success around it, right? I mean, a lot of what's Calgary is still in Calgary, although with the moves that they made recently, it's looking less and less like that, right? Dave Dickinson pretty much letting go almost everyone around him. So, but it's just interesting to see at a time where a lot of things that were taken out of Calgary having success in Toronto, and Calgary's been on this decline. It really makes you wonder too, who was really instrumental. I mean, I think Dickinson played a huge part. Huffnagel played a huge part. I'm not saying they didn't, but I think there's a realization that there are other people who did, and I think Ryan Dinwiddie understood that. We look at the guys they recruited: Wynn McManus, Tavares Daniels. Eventually, they got Kadeem Carey, Deshaun Amos. Like, you look at Royce Metche. You look at all these players that they brought in from Calgary. Yes, they're former Calgary players, but they're also core key culture guys in Toronto, right? Corey Mace they brought in from Calgary. Like, these were key parts of that culture that they knew that they needed to bring in to have this success that they're in right now. And, it's funny because the longest time people were annoyed with where Toronto was. A lot of Toronto's fans were frustrated. You win a Grey Cup in 2017, you only have 2 of the most miserable years a fan base can have.
Yeah.
And now they're having this sustained success, and they still find. I always find it's interesting. They have this sustained success, and yet there's still people not happy. And I'm like, but you just won a Grey Cup, guys. Like, you just won a Grey Cup. Maybe understand that this is some things that happen when you have the success. You always have to do what's best for the organization. And again, I jumping to conclusions a little bit, maybe of what people think is going to happen with Ivan and Fields. They might stick around.
Yeah.
Right. We don't know that for sure. We won't know that until the new coach gets installed. And, I felt like maybe there was something missed last year because I was told that a big hire, like there was going to be some news on that front last year, and it felt like it didn't happen. It felt like it didn't happen, and Fields and Ivan were put into this. So I'm curious to see how it all plays out. I think you have to just kind of let things settle before you really start to, like, they know what they're doing here. They're in Toronto.
Let's take what you said there, and I'd like to highlight it a little bit. So, what it came around to the end of this season when they came out with the twin defensive guys, and when they originally said they were going to have some news, it seemed like they were place settings. They were set there in place to they were holding
never
they
a
were
long-term option.
Yeah, they were holding a place for somebody. As it turns out, longer term, now we find out that in fact that's the case. That there was always, I think there was always the idea that they wanted to have one defensive coordinator that had the full understanding of the position. By virtue of them splitting it, tells you that they didn't think that either of those guys could have done the whole thing, and the best way to go was to have them share the responsibility. Now, with the Argos and what they're doing moving forward, and you're right, David. I mean, they do things. It's easy to say they do things right when they win. I guess that basically is, if you're going to judge a team by how good they are, winning is a great way to do it, right? And to your point, where in 2017 they came back and lost twice badly the next two seasons. That's 100% true. And the Argos now need, and we were all there. We were all at the square, right? And the repeated message that was going on there from ownership all the way down to the training staff, maybe not the training staff, the on-air people, was that, hey, Argo fans, hey, Toronto sports fans, we're here. Come check us out. They really, to the root, understand that they need to have more fans and they need to work harder to get them. And winning is great, but there's more to it. And one of the things that you could tell from the players, the coach, I mean, you heard the coach, he was trying to sell tickets. You heard Pinball trying to sell tickets. You heard the CEO, the president of MLSC, the CEO of MLSC, talk about selling tickets. You heard Tannenbaum selling tickets. They all know that's what they've got to do. And fortunately for them, their immediate history is lose in the Eastern final, win a Grey Cup, lose in the Eastern final, win a Grey Cup. They've got an opportunity to sell the team. So they should, and I think they will do their best. I'm just hopeful that there's people out there who give this football team a chance and don't worry anymore about disappointment, because that's the other thing David said, he alluded to. I don't think he said it outright, but the disappointment Argo fans have had historically over the years, you could stack up all kinds of reasons. I mean, I was a season ticket holder when we were going on the road for home games. So, there's that.
Because like even I've seen the season ticket march still go online where everyone's saying, hey, best bang for your buck in the city. It's just, enjoy a summer's night out at BMO Field. You've seen them basically saying it. The other thing I think that's important too is that not even to what happened last year, but it's more or less what happened off the field last year. Just keep a clean, squeaky image. You're the champs. You're this. I know the video of Kelly was circulating where everyone was like saying, how could you say this? And I'm just like, that was a mix of Percocets and alcohol, something we don't condone here just because you're not supposed to mix the two. But just keep your image, keep moving forward, and keep showing the fans, hey, keep giving them a reason to show up. Keep showing them like, hey, this. And the other point, too, that I made on your show last week, Frank, that I know you can go off on as well, is the start times. The fact that you had one game started before 7 o'clock last year. I think you need to get to the CFL and say, hey, give us a 3 o'clock, give us a 4 o'clock kickoff on a Saturday or a Sunday afternoon during the summer. Hamilton gets them a lot. Like last year, I saw Hamilton had at least, I think, Well, I know one's Labor Day, but still they get a handful of those early afternoon kickoffs. You do that, you give that whole, hey, start your Saturday night off with the Argos. You're at the game from 4 to 7, and then you have the rest of the night to enjoy yourself. Meanwhile,
And if you're traveling, if I can inject that, and if you're traveling, we can fit it in to get you home and get your kids in bed in time for whatever.
And it's not a school, and if it's a school night too, instead
and
of
even if it isn't, for that matter, you don't want to bring your kids home at 1:00 in the morning.
No,
If
no,
you're
no,
coming
no.
from out of town.
I was just trying to add on to I'm saying that because last year's home opener against BC was the Sunday night. That game's at 4 or 5 even. Instead of getting home at 1 o'clock in the morning, you're getting home at 10 or 11 o'clock at night, which is a time when a kid should be going to bed because, let's be honest, the Argonauts are a very family-friendly environment that you want to bring the whole family to. It's one of those things where it's a fun time. And I understand that. Look, they got to sell the tickets, and we'll see what happens when the new schedule comes out. And I know the CFL loves doing the 4 o'clock thing, but they pretty much did it from Labor Day onward. I think you should always try to do that because even I know in the last couple of years, there's been games where it's like the West game was at 4 and the Argos played at 7. Why not flip-flop it around? I know TV's a big reason why, but you have to think about the fans in the stands as well, not just the TV numbers.
David, one question I want to ask you on that, because on the tail end of that, do you think the parking would be better if it was at 3 or 4 o'clock in the afternoon?
Well, if you look at the concert schedule that happens at the Bud stage, right? A lot of those concerts happen in the evening, so fans would at least get ahead of it on that. Parking is set by the city. It's public parking. It's not private. It's not a private lot. It's a city. I think. Oh, other than I think the underground is private because that belongs to the CNE's Enercare / Coca-Cola Coliseum. But like where people park for tailgating, that's all set for fans, and some fans have figured out ways to get it a little bit cheaper. I'm not going to reveal the secrets on there just to avoid any potential. I don't want to spoil the party. Let's just say for people, but I look at it this way. You need to find a way to make this game appeal more to the younger crowds and I think also the families. It is hard when you have certain things that go against, and there's a perception about this team, guys. It's been like this ever since I was watching the CFL. People look at the CFL in a different way. It's the perception that it is. That perception needs to change, and the way it changes is if the company that that's operating it, that owns the team, starts to put some serious, like makes it look. I wouldn't say put all their time and effort into it, but make it seem like it's not a second class organization to this.
Like
team.
You care, like they care about it.
I don't know if it's about caring. I think it's about innovative new ideas that haven't been tried yet. And I have all right.
Initiative. My bad. That's the word I meant to say. Not caring, more of an initiative.
Yeah, and that's a fair way to put it.
I didn't mean to cut you off there. That's just the word that came to my mind right away. I didn't mean to say not caring. It's just more the initiative.
No, I mean, like again, like yeah, I understand. I know you. People, they do, and I know you know that they do care over there. It's just, it's what's the energy and effort being put to it. When you look at the other teams in this league versus the Argos, and you know what, they do some good stuff there. We do acknowledge that there are people that work for that team that do a good job. Unfortunately, it's not to the level of what the other teams like. Look at BC, Winnipeg, Saskatchewan, Calgary, even to a good degree, because Calgary and Toronto are very similar ownership structure, but you can tell there's a difference in how it's operated, in my opinion, versus what I see how it's done. And hopefully with Keith Pelly in charge, that changes, because it does need to change.
Because if they can start average, so last year we kind of noticed this attendance pretty much was plateau until the CNE game, which that's the one game I'll say. The Thursday night for that was perfect, like as we know, because the CNE was still very busy, but it wasn't overcrowdedly chaotic. Like I remember after last year's game it was, but Frank, remember we were able to like walk around and stuff like that, and it's not wall-to-wall people. It's like that's not a problem. But the problem was they didn't really start advertising games that well on social media and really hammering home buy tickets, come out until the CNE game. That's the thing, not just the team, but the team, fans, all the stuff. You got to be doing that year round where hey, come do this, because like even we knew last year the one game against Montreal, the Friday night of the long weekend, we know right away that's not going to draw. There's this game's happening. Oh, but then there's this and this going on. It's not going to draw. You have to find ways to circumvent around that, just to say, hey, don't worry about what we're not going to get. But I think next year, if they can aim for at least a minimum of 16 to 17 per game, it's just building it up to eventually, hopefully, where it's 20 plus a game.
Yeah, I mean, they really made strides, I will say, but you got to find a way to. It's funny because so many people say it's a great experience. It's a great experience. Well, it's only a great experience to those who go and see it. It's only a great experience to those who.
You have to say why it's a great experience to people.
Yeah, and people who feel like that they're getting value for what they're getting. And yes, I know you got to keep your season ticket holders happy. Although, man, what I went through with some of them at the parade at the championship rally, hearing the way some of them were talking, it was as if they need to have the throne. They felt like they should have been up on stage with the players, right? Like it's a tough balance, but I do think that hopefully with this Grey Cup, with this win, with Keith Pelly being there, it's going to be different. It has to be different.
Yeah.
Like I feel like last time they just didn't capitalize on it at all. They didn't like it was sort of they win the Grey Cup title and then things kind of go quiet. A good thing was as soon as they win the Grey Cup, they're at the Leafs game. They're at the Raptors game. They were at the Marlies game. I think they're at the 905 game as well. That's good. But that's just 1 week. How are you going to keep this role going all off season? And that's, I think, the challenge.
Do random meet and greets. Chris, if you're listening, just like, hey, player X and the Grey Cup are going to be at Real Sports Saturday from 2 to 4. They're going to be at a Sport Check in Mississauga. They're going to be at one in Barrie. They're going to be at one in the Eaton Center, for example. And I'm trying to say places that are like close to like each of the three of us. Obviously, that's why I mentioned Barrie for Frank. But yeah, just you got to keep community engagement up too. That's the other big thing as well. Just like getting involved, get out in the community, make yourself known. Like, hey, we're here. We're a great product. And you know what? Come playoff time, we're not totally going to break your heart and fail expectations.
I guess there's a lot going on in the league right now, and keeping stuff moving is a great way to do it.
Yep.
David's point, doing something for a week isn't good enough. They really do. The part that I find boggling, it's not like they don't have a connection in the media where they can put out the word that the Argos are around.
Use the three of us. But yeah, moving on. Just want to move on from some other stuff too to keep the conversation flowing. Look, so we talked about it already. With Calgary, the only other point I want to make, just add on to David's stuff about they stole it away. I don't ever look at it like that. I always look at it as when, and I'm going to use a interesting analogy here. It's like when a chef leaves a restaurant and opens up their own restaurant and basically takes inspiration from one to the other. And it's like, oh, you stole my dish. You did this. No, it's just they took what you did, put their little flair on it, and then poof, that's it. That's what I think Dinwiddie has done with the Toronto Argonauts, where it's like, hey, this is what I learned in Calgary. I'm going to apply it in Toronto, but we're going to do things my way. It's kind of and I can attest this with a football fan with the Pats with Bill Belichick, because a lot of his coaches would leave, go to other places, but try to emulate what he did and end up getting hated and they'd be fired within 2-3 years. So that's why I think he's gone off, been his own man. That's why Ryan Dinwiddie's been so successful and is now going on to his 5th year in Toronto.
Yeah, and what I will say too, which with some of the players and people in the organization, they care about having this be a success both on and off the field, or like seeing it in the stands too. In the past, Ricky Ray has been asked about the attendance, and it was almost like, yeah, I mean, it is what it is. You would ask some people, even within the organization, it didn't compute that, as much as they have to worry about their play on the field, they also need to figure out a way to help, they got to be a part of bringing the people in as well. I think that's something that I think gets missed a lot with these things.
Yeah, that's exactly it. Just moving on right now. Obviously yesterday too, the big news came out of Calgary with Vernon Adams Jr. going to the Stampeders. But I just want to ask you guys right now, what would be, you think, not the bigger deals, but what's the more important story to pay attention to for the CFL for the fans of the league? What VA potentially can do in Calgary, or how the Calgary Stampeders are going to approach free agency, or the Montreal Alouettes quarterback situation with Davis Alexander getting a new contract and apparently Cody Fajardo being owed a bunch of money in the next few months.
And whether he'll get paid that money.
That's it. That's why I say it.
Because he'll get paid that.
They can pull that from under his rug. They can pull that from under the rug.
I really think this is another one of those situations like I talked about Dinwiddie, and winning organizations love their players, but they love the team more. And if you place that template over the Montreal Alouettes, they saw what Davis Alexander could do. They know what Cody Fajardo can do. The question is, can Davis Alexander copy or be as good as Fajardo for less money, which is the case, right? So I'm sure they didn't sign him for as much as they pay Fajardo. We talk about this all the time. Get a guy whose floor is about 3/4 the cost of another player. You bring him in, you hope that he ends up being 100% of that other player, but earns less money. That's the cold, hard truth about the Canadian Football League. The cap is a very impactful thing. The other thing is with Fajardo, he's getting there in years, right? And you've got to predict what a player is going to do. You can't predict all the time that they're going to repeat what they did last year, because that is it's when it comes to age, it isn't rinse and repeat. There's rinse and change too. So, sometimes, like I said about the good teams, right? They got to make the tough decisions. They've got to move on before they should have moved on.
Yeah.
Right. They got to move then. And that makes it tough. It looks kind of early, but then it could be on time. So, yeah. So, I believe that if they allow Fajardo to go, they've made the decision that Davis Alexander is their quarterback. And I also think that Montreal has an idea already. And this is what I know about the Canadian Football League and what I believe about the Canadian Football League. Don't look at the guy they're replacing. Look at the guy they're replacing is being replaced by.
Yeah.
Because that's what this year taught us with quarterbacks in Toronto. They had 3. They played all 3. They actually had 4. They brought back the 4th one, but they had 3. They played all 3. So, it's the same way we're looking at, the odds are very good, probably pretty guaranteed that Arbuckle isn't going to be an Argo next year. So,
By the way, that money with Fajardo, I just looked it up from Justin Dunk. It's a $200,000 roster bonus that is due January 15th. So they have about, I'd say, 6 weeks to decide on if they want to keep him or not. And that's just the one point I wanted to add to that. But I completely agree with you where don't think about who's coming in. Is the person that's coming in, can they replicate or can they be who the person that's outgoing is? Because we know if Fajardo does get cut by Montreal, it's not just going to be like he rides off in the sunset. No, someone out there is going to see, hey, he's proven he can win at the highest stages and consistently do it. So someone's going to take a chance on him because even though the quarterback carousel is still spinning and there's a lot of spots already spoken for, a player like him would open up one of those spots.
Think about it.
Yeah.
As much as Bo Levi Mitchell was available, a Grey Cup champion, right?
Yep.
But a Grey Cup champion that was, physically seemed to be hitting a wall. Now this year we could end up with 2 Grey Cup champions in the last 2 Grey Cups, free to go somewhere. Just think about that. I can hardly wrap my head around that.
Well, that's the thing, right? We talk about we talk about the quarterback carousel, and like the first one, obviously with Vernon Adams going to Calgary, like that's a big one because now Calgary's spoken for. They're not doing anything else with their quarterback position. So that's if you're Nick Arbuckle, if you're Cody Fajardo, that's a team already off your wish list. There aren't many teams right now that really have openings, right? Ottawa, I think, is spoken for, unless they feel that they need to bring in somebody to help not only mentor Drew Brown, who's still kind of young and still finding his way. So that, I mean, obviously, I don't think Arbuckle will go back to Ottawa with the way that kind of all worked out. But like, I do think that the Davis Alexander move does change the formula quite a bit, right? Because I mean, you look at what Danny Machocha said today after the deal was announced. At just 26 years old, Davis is the future of this franchise. Right? We're now entrusting him with the leadership of the team, and we have full confidence in him. That pretpretty much means to me that Cody Fajardo is going to find himself out of a job.
Yeah.
Cody Fajardo, how do you hear that?
I think he's due. I think it was the Justin Dunk report. It was $200,000 he's due in January, so he's going to get cut before that. And Fajardo could. It's all up to him, right? If he feels like he can still play, will a team take him on as a starter? I don't know if a team will. I think maybe. I think Cody Fajardo still has value to a team. I just don't know if it's as a starter anymore, just because we've seen the decline from him a bit. We also saw good things from him. So but I think with Montreal, could they look at a Nick Arbuckle, bring in a Nick Arbuckle to help Davis Alexander along, right? They're not paying him too much that they could afford another quarterback. So I think that I don't know if it's one or the other. I think it's just those two moves within the last 2 days have really changed. I think a lot of plans for people. If you're an agent right now who has a free agent quarterback, you're probably like, that's a tough one, because now you gotta find spots like, what's Hamilton doing? Is Bo going back? From what it looks like, it probably is, because there's a lot of money tied up there.
Yeah.
BC, they got no money. They got no money left. They might be just looking for a backup too. Saskatchewan, what's going on with Trevor Harris? Is he done? That could be the one opening for a player there, but
does Fajardo go back to Saskatchewan?
Does Fajardo go back to Saskatchewan? Would Arbuckle find himself in Saskatchewan? Trey Ford, what's going on with him? Is he back in Edmonton? Like, there are teams that still have to figure out what their head coach situation is before they can even go on and get a quarterback. So there's a lot of moving parts here that I think are going to really shape everything. And it's funny because we heard, I mean, Frank, you and I heard at the during Grey Cup that, like, expect a lot of things to happen right after the Grey Cup's awarded. Right? It wasn't going to be like, oh, well, teams are going to take a few days or take a week. But you heard Ryan Dinwiddie, I'd like to go out and take a week off. But he's like, I might not even be able to happen because everything is happening right now. Literally, as Bob Cole will say, everything is happening.
Yeah, the quarterback situation, the one hole, I think, is Calgary. Hasn't been filled yet. If there's nothing that we've learned about Adams, is that there's always a quarterback ghost haunting him. There's always one in the background that could take it over. So, and I don't mean that. I'm sorry. I don't mean to laugh, but because it's got to be hard. But it's ironic. It seems everywhere he goes, there's always a quarterback that is the quarterback in waiting. So is that, like, does Arbuckle go back to Calgary? I don't think so. The Dickinson's mindset is on defense. And when I say defense, his defense, that everything he's doing is him defending himself. So now he's looked around and pretty much, if you add things up, he's literally blaming everybody else around him for the position that Calgary's in. Because he's firing everybody. There's, no one's safe, it seems, in Calgary. So it's going to be interesting. The quarterback situation, is he going to, I think, David, you're semi right there that there's an opening for a quarterback in Calgary. Is it Fajardo? Is it Arbuckle?
I don't think there is anymore, though. With Vernon Adams, they also signed PJ Walker, and he's getting, I think it's $100,000 guaranteed. Like, they don't have money for a quarterback anymore.
Yeah. Well, I'm just saying, where else is there an opening?
Edmonton will be one.
Edmonton. I don't know. I have a feeling that Trey Ford might finally get the chance. You
But
know,
guess
it's
what?
all
Yeah,
about him and his. It's all about him and his ability to have. Sorry, guys. Gosh, tried to
I don't.
turn
But
it
I don't
off.
think it's just Trey Ford there. Like he should. I'm not saying it shouldn't be. It should be, but I don't think it's going to be. Like it, right? And so I do think that. I do think that Edmonton and Saskatchewan are the two wild cards here. I really
I just
do.
think there's a formula now that I think, because teams and organizations copy winners. There's going to be this thought where a veteran needs to be in the background somewhere when you have a guy you're not sure
Yeah.
about 100%. That's my only motivation to say what I said.
Yeah, no, exactly. The other thing we got to remember too with like Edmonton and Calgary as well. So, well, Edmonton's still trying to get a head coach, but which involves apparently Buck Pierce, Rick Campbell, Jordan Maximic. Pardon me if I butcher that. Mark Killam, and then Jarius Jackson. So we'll see what happens with any of those names. But for Calgary too, though, we know this year as well. Dave Dickinson firing his staff is essentially saying, "Hey, this is on me." To where if this doesn't work this year, I'm gone. And do we really think we got to think there's got to be pressure to change up because and I know it's the cliche, but you're hosting the Grey Cup in 2 years. Your facilities were built for 1972. The team, because that's the thing too. If you have the worst facilities in the league, your uniforms look like a KFC bucket, and the just overall stadium's not in the stadium, the state of the stadium and the team's not in the best position. Besides selling the city, what's that telling everyone else that we know? Hey, yeah, Calgary's not going to want to do that, and Calgary's not going to be in the Grey Cup in 2026 because we know with Winnipeg this coming year, we know they're going to want to compete to then be the host team that's playing in the big game come next November. So there's a lot of moving parts and a lot of moving questions. I was going to ask about BC until you did mention the money thing, just when it comes to the guy like a Fajardo or an Arbuckle, just because of to stand behind Rourke if times go bad. Trey Ford as well, because I don't know what MBT situation is, but it is Edmonton. I think we got to wait to see what head coach and general manager do first. And even still, I think the one thing left in all this as well is, actually, Ed Harvey, excuse me, with Hamilton. What does their new GM want? For as much as Bo is there, we know he's probably going to want to try to bring in a guy that eventually is his quarterback, unless he's impressed with Bo Levi Mitchell.
Well, and do they also believe in Taylor Powell
or Talia Tagovailoa?
Yeah. So I think Hamilton's going to keep a status quo. I think they're going to focus on the defense. I think they're going to focus on building around rather than just start fresh at quarterback. I don't think they want to do that. I really don't.
The problem with Hamilton this year was defense. Just simply put, was just defense. Their offense was fine. They got to work on the defense. They've got to do something there defensively that has them carrying their end of the bargain. That's the problem with Hamilton. And we haven't even talked about special teams. Hamilton was notorious for the best special teams. They haven't exactly burned up the league, So they've got work to do outside of figuring out who to replace at quarterback or who to play at quarterback.
Well, I mean, that's it, right? Like, I think some teams are going to realize we can't put all of our effort into. I think what Toronto's win in the Grey Cup showed, you can win a Grey Cup without having amazing quarterback play. You can have good quarterback play. You can have decent quarterback play, but you don't need a guy that's going to throw for 400 yards, a bunch of touchdowns, because you can be solid in all three phases and win. That's what the CFL. Frank, you and I.
And who doesn't know that more than Hamilton?
Right?
Who doesn't know that more than Hamilton?
And Frank, you've watched. I mean, I didn't watch the days of pinball, right? I didn't watch those. Like, that's the true fundamental CFL football, right? It's winning it all three phases, and that's where I think like Winnipeg, really, in my opinion, where Winnipeg failed is they didn't have it all three phases.
No.
Yeah, their defense was good. Their offense, okay, their offense wasn't bad.
Lived and died with Collaros, and they died with him.
But
mistake.
Yeah, but no, I
Finger,
truly,
excuse
I
me, Dad.
truly think that teams need to get back to basics of we need to put focus on all three phases.
Absolutely.
Our Canadian
And
talent.
to what you said, Griff, that out comes that statement I made earlier: loyalty to the crest in the front or the name in the back. The head coach of the Winnipeg Blue Bombers had loyalty to the name in the back, because if he had a thought about the crest, honestly, if he would have been loyal to the Winnipeg Blue Bombers, he would have said, "You know what? See what you see. See the real deal. Here is that he can't throw the ball." After he waited even after a third interception, he was still in there. I mean, it's the Grey Cup. This is it. And that's what these teams have to do. That's what all the CFL teams have to do. They don't have the money to play games. They've got to win. They got to figure out how to win.
So it wasn't the Argos. It was the CFL social channel yesterday released a video of all of Toronto's interceptions during the playoffs. There were some that were just like, why'd you make that throw? It was like the two Wynton McManus ones where he was literally wide open in the field. The Benji Franklin one in the East Final, it was the bounce just right into his hands. But it's the Robert Priester pick six in the Grey Cup. That's a throw you don't make. That was just because the Deshaun Amos one was a beautiful catch. I'm not just trying to discredit what Deshaun did, but the Priester pick six, that's a throw if you're a quarterback you should not be making. You threw right into coverage and you got burned for 6.
We talked to Ryan Dinwiddie. He's like, he can't throw a football. Like he knew it. He's like, guys, force him to go. The game plan changed with that injury. The game changed with that injury. We didn't really even talk about
on both sides of the ball.
On both sides of the ball. But Ryan Dinwiddie pretty much told us after the game the game plan was he can't throw.
Make him uncomfortable.
Force him to go deep. Keep everything in front, right? Protect everything in front. Take away Brady Oliveira. I talked to Royce Metier the day before the game. He's like, take away the run game. That's what we need to do. We need to take away the run game. And Toronto has been one of those guys. What was one of the better run defense teams. They knew that if they took away the run, force Zach to throw it because Zach hasn't done it in the last. They talked about it on the broadcast. 3 straight Grey Cups, I think 1 touchdown. The last 3, he only had 1 touchdown. Now, I think the picks were a lot to do with the injury. He was trying, he couldn't throw it. And that's on the coach's staff to say, you know what? Why are we making him do this? Why are we putting Zach in a situation where people are now questioning him when that decision should have been taken out of his hands, unfortunately?
Let's put it this way. Just can I get a percentage from you guys of what percentage of effectiveness did Caleros have after the injury?
20%. Oh, in the overall game, like his effectiveness.
No, his ability to be a quarterback because of the finger. What was the percentage of his skill? How much did it drop? What did it drop to?
Oh, it dropped at least 70%.
That's what I'm saying. That's why I said 20%.
And how much less of a quarterback was the backup? That's my calculation. I'm just trying to highlight because I agree with you guys. He was probably at 25-30% of his effectiveness.
And my issue is why, and I understand Strevler getting hurt changed your quarterback room a lot. Why wasn't that backup ready for that situation? I'm sorry, but if you don't, the Argos, Kelly's out, Arbuckle was ready to come in.
Yep.
And he made sure they didn't lose that game against Montreal. If they needed to go to Cameron Dukes, they also felt Cameron Dukes would have been fine. I mean, I don't think Cameron Dukes would have been as good as Arbuckle just because of the way that Dinwiddie's trust was working. But again, that was a coaching flaw, in my opinion. And that's why a lot of people were on Buck Pierce in Winnipeg. There's people like the people who cover the team that were trying to squash those concerns about Buck Pierce because of what Buck Pierce has been able to do in his time as an offensive coordinator. But a lot of people are also like, why wasn't there a better plan when Zach got hurt? And that's unfortunate. Like, coaches have to answer to that. And now hey, Winnipeg fans might figure out what life is going to be like without Buck Pierce, because he's got two interviews right now, BC and in Edmonton, that both are looking at him as potential head coaches. Right? You might figure that out real soon.
So, how many more times do we have to scream that in the Canadian Football League, you win or lose based on your quarterback? I mean, that's the message. It's been the message the past few years, and it's been a repeat. It's been a banging drum, So, how do you go into the Grey Cup relying on one quarterback? How the heck do you do that? Oh, and by the way,
look at the Grey Cup 2
years
years ago.
When the Argos won the Grey Cup, is because their backup could take over, and we know that quarterbacking is very important. And I kind of, in a way, when we were sitting there, guys, and David, when we were in the press box watching him continue to throw, I don't know if you remember what I was saying. I said I was disappointed in Winnipeg because of that. I was disappointed because I couldn't believe that a team that well put together didn't have another quarterback to put in that could play better than a guy who was playing at 30% his ability. I was so disappointed to see that. I couldn't believe it. I really am. I'm sorry I'm harping on that, but I just can't believe that it ended. The Grey Cup ended up being won by the Argos, and as an Argo, I'd be a little disappointed too, because they're not getting the credit they deserve. I think they would have beat anybody that day, healthy or not. I think it was trending towards the Argos taking that game over. The coincidence at the time was that Caleros hurt his finger.
And the Argos were doing a lot of good things in that game. So it's not like, I think a lot of people were like, if Caleros doesn't get hurt, I think it's a closer game. I don't think it's a blowout.
Absolutely it is.
But you give the credit to the Argos. They were doing enough on all three phases to make life difficult for Winnipeg.
They were the better full team.
Yeah, they were.
Absolutely. Because the big thing with Toronto was too, though, is just, you don't believe that we can do it? Okay, watch us, and they did it. But to echo Frank's point, they literally, because I know from what I've heard from the Winnipeg sports reporters after last year's, 2 years ago, so now 3 Grey Cups ago, was just shock that they lost because they didn't think they were going to lose. It was anger and just overall frustration to last year in Hamilton. You got no one to blame but yourself for losing this one. This wasn't lost because, like for example, how Enoch had the key interception in the fourth quarter on the Robbie Smith blocked field goal. There wasn't the Cole Speaker catch or the Phil Pott run late in the game. No, this was lost because you lived and died by certain people. And guess what? When those people couldn't go, there was no other option.
Yeah, and I hope for their sake it changes. I hope every CFL team understands that this quarterback carousel that we started talking about has to do with loading your quarterback room with guys that can win. There's been a change too, where you're seeing a little more often the quarterbacks we're seeing in Toronto. The quarterback's running the short game himself, the starting quarterback. We're starting to see teams get away from the Strevler model. They're and I think this year enhances that thinking because the Argos needed 3 starters this year.
And speaking of which, before we wrap up today, I want to play a little game with you guys, which is involving Toronto's free agency class. I'm going to list, there's 2 players I'm going to leave off this list. One, because we know he's pretty much going to probably not be back. And then the other, because we know it'd be a solid 10 out of 10 we would want him back next year. That being Wynton McManus and Nick Arbuckle. So basically I'm going to say a player's name and for how much you think they're of importance to bring back, number between 1 and 10. And the first one is, because it goes by position here from Third Down Nation, Cameron Dukes.
I would say a 4.
I'd go one more because he's an interesting variable. I'd say 5 for him. That's what I was thinking.
I'm going to keep this fun and go 6, just because I think for him, if he were to try elsewhere, it's where would you go and where would you fit in? Meanwhile, Toronto, you kind of know, hey, this is my role. and this is what I bring to the team, and you already kind of know the system entering his third season into the CFL. The next one, running back Candid Frank.
Oh, that's, for me, he's an important part to make this team go. If there's another horse out there, I'd drop it down, but right now he'd have to be at least an 8 to me.
He's a 7 for me. I do wonder if the other running backs, they look at that and wonder, can they go forward with McMahon and Adeboye? I mean, Carey, it's undeniable what the impact he had on this team. It's just they got a lot. There's a lot of business moves that need to be made, and I just wonder if there's going to be enough for him. I think they'll try. I don't know if it's going to be a high up priority, but I think his importance is a 7.
I look at your question, Griff, to look at these players individually, not how they fit into the group.
Yeah,
because otherwise, I agree 100% with David.
Yeah, I'm an 8 as well. I'm in the sense of what he did for the team, and also too, because when you look at where would he go is the other big question as well, because a lot of teams have running backs. There's one team that we know he absolutely would not go back to, and that's the Calgary Stampeders. So the only real options I think would be maybe Hamilton and Ottawa, maybe BC. Well, don't they have Walter Fletcher?
No, but
excuse me, Walter Fletcher's in Montreal.
Yeah, I think BC, they're gonna want a better running game. So we'll see. I think there'll be teams that'll be calling Kadeem for sure.
Yeah, but for overall impact on the Argos, I have to go with an 8 as well, just because of what he was able to bring. But at the same time, too, if they wanted to run McMahon and Adeboye and sorry if I butchered his name, and bring in a younger guy, like maybe draft someone, that'd be okay too. Kind of like what we've seen them for as good as they've been draft and develop. Brandon Calver, I know didn't see a whole lack of a lot of playing time, but I feel like fullbacks are always fun, so I'd go with 6.
I'll go 4. He's a fullback.
Which player are we talking about now?
Brandon Calver, fullback. A 4 because he gets used, but it's more special teams and certain packages. He's not even I think he's like a 3-4 in my opinion.
Right now, for me, that I wouldn't put him higher than 3 or 4 myself, only because he hasn't established himself. And the question begs the answer: why would you want to keep him based on what he's done? He hasn't really done that much. But I wanted to say something about the running back situation. I wouldn't give Candid Frank an 8 before Adeboye got injured last year. Today, I wouldn't have given him that. But my disappointment in Adeboye in the way he's progressed since he was injured, I'm not going to say flatline, but he hasn't improved a lot, which makes me lean on. I just wanted to add that's why I lean on Candid Frank, because there is the need. But yeah, Calvert, not just maybe a 2 or a 3 for me.
They did do some I saw there was an email today about some re-signings, but I think for the most part these are just practice squad guys like Clayton Glasgow and Daniel Shin, among others. He was the only offensive lineman on the list.
Yeah.
So I assume most of those guys were offensive linemen. And then I'm going to do a 2 for 1 here because there's only 2 receivers on this list. But you have a DeMonte Coxie and Janarian Grant. Coxie, I'm going to go with 4 just because I feel like he's in that Jamal Peters category where I feel like if he gets pushed out, someone's going to come in and take his role right away, like a Herslow, Makai Polk, Kevin Meatall. And there's another team out there that probably is going to give him more than what Toronto will probably offer.
I'm much higher on Coxie. I think he's like a 6-7 for me because when he is targeted and when he's got one-on-one, there's no one better in the CFL, in my opinion. He is one of the better players in coverage. The problem is, Makai Polk took a lot of the targets. You still have DeVaris Daniels there. You have Dejon Brissett. You have guys. So there might just not be a place for him.
Sorry to cut you off. That's why I went so low. Great player, great guy, cool guy to deal with. I think he's a numbers game situation. That's why I gave it such a low number.
I'd give him a 5 only because it could go either way for me. And I think you should add a question. There's a question missing you haven't asked yet that you should ask. You ready?
Yes.
Who's the odds-on favorite to become a Hamilton Tiger Cat?
Oh my God. When your two biggest free agent signings are literally highlights of against your team that you just signed with, that is a problem. That's something they did with Brandon Barlow and Jamal Peters last offseason. And we're getting royally cooked for it on Twitter. Oh my God.
There's going to be somebody, at least one big name's going to go to Hamilton. At least one. I'm just dying to know who it is.
Coxie might be one of those guys.
That's why the thought jumped into my head, because he's a good candidate for that. For everything that we all said, and I agree with everything that we've said, and that is that Coxie's a big time player, but he's a big time player in a group of guys, of more than one big time player. And that's an embarrassment of riches that the Argos have. Is, I mean, your leading yards guy in receptions was a rookie.
Adds to my point.
And he might get some looks in the NFL. We know those happen too.
Absolutely, they do.
But even the fact, too, that like you can then say if Coxie were to leave, you could probably lean on Dejan Brissett to take a more elevated role. You can lean on Jake Herslow to come off the practice squad and, hey, be that guy. Even, too, name I mentioned, Kevin Mittal as well, who kind of laid low for most of the year, but then popped for a touchdown in the Grey Cup. I remember that beautiful touchdown run he had in at the game in Guelph, David, again, ironically, against Hamilton. So it's just, you know what? Like that's where I come with it at, where Toronto's got the guys towards the numbers thing. Meanwhile, with Janarian Grant, because of what he is, because of what he's capable to do, I'm gonna go with 7 for bringing him back. Also, because I think for him as well, you're gonna get people who want someone what he can do, who's fast, who gets tackled by the dreads, and scores a lot of touchdowns,
and is an awesome kick returner.
That's what I meant. That's why I was trying to say, like, yeah, you bundle it all in. That's an awesome kick returner.
Let me tell you something, Griff, that we heard at the Grey Cup from the coach when it comes to Herslow. Unsolicited compliments to that player, where he came out without anybody asking. I'm trying to figure out how to get him in the game. He was, so to me that was a little bit of foreshadowing, and why David and you are right about Coxie, because the coach already he already telegraphed the fact that there's a spot, but it's just not available right now. So he's already told his player, you're in my lineup, because if anybody goes, I have faith in you. And I think that's who Herslow is. Herslow's the first guy up if someone disappears.
Very true.
That's basically just adding on. Coxie's a guy I can see him staying and I can see him going. That's where I lean with
Absolutely. That. That's why I said 5. It can go either way. It's going to be an interesting offseason for the Argos. They've done very well over the past few years under Dinwiddie, and of course, Pinball. The team has done a great job of being competitive. And the one thing that I always have fun talking to Pinball about is the fact that he promised that this team would be competing for a cup, and they're actually doing it. Last year they were competing for a cup. The loss was a very disappointing one, but not because they didn't have a chance to win a cup, but that they had probably a better chance to win that cup than they did the 2 they did win.
It's funny how those things work. Do you guys have numbers for Janarian or?
Ooh, Janarian Grant. Yeah, I'm high on Janarian Grant.
I'm going 6 or 7.
He's like he was an 8 for me, because they really did not have a plan until like Deontay McMahon, I know, was the other returner, but Janarian Grant's one of those guys where you look at what happened to Winnipeg. Winnipeg's special teams was always something you had to watch out for, and it was a problem for them. So,
and he's a locker guy supreme.
Yeah, they really I think he's a guy you hope you can bring him back. I think a lot of teams would love to add a Janarian Grant. So he he might be the next Javon Leake that gets paid a lot of money, and the Argos might have to go and find another option.
I don't know if it'll be as easy as it was getting him, because he kind of fell on their lap, didn't he?
He did. The Argos, no one got him. The Argos were like, okay, he's available. Let's go and grab him. They needed a kick returner. They're like, okay, let's go and get him.
I love how you moved in quicker as you said that. You were like, okay, moving. Let's go get him. Like you just said, how you're like back and then you moved in. The offensive linemen on this list are, which I'll say this right now with Toronto, I think that was their most underrated, better qualities of the team this year.
Absolutely. Had a bad start in the year. The coach even mentioned, remember, we went to a couple of games where he was unhappy with the offensive line. It changed drastically.
One really solid addition to that has been, and he's dealt with injuries the last couple of years, but he played really well down the stretch. Left guard, David Giffen, excuse me. Really improving in his role. Hunter at left tackle, and then you have the Castro at center, and then I'm trying to blank on who's on. Literally just had the depth chart open, but
Vandal was getting some reps on the right side,
and Dejon Allen.
Is it not amazing how well Nicastro was able to move to center?
He's done it. He was the center a couple of years ago. Then he got hurt. They brought in Sirocco. Sirocco gets hurt, so he has to move back to center. I'm curious if that's going to be the move. If he's going to stay at center, if they're going to bring back, maybe they're going to try. If Sirocco is healthy, if they're going to try that again. It's one of those things to keep an eye on for sure.
So then, does Nicastro kick back to right guard then, or?
If they bring Sirocco back to be a center, he would kick back to right guard for sure.
So Sirocco is not on this list. There's only 3. There's Landon Rice, there's Gregor McKellar, and there's Isaiah Cage.
Yeah, I wonder about Cage because Hunter moved. He moved to left tackle, and I wonder if they look at that and maybe say he stays at right tackle. It's possible. They like Cage. Cage is a good offensive lineman, right? Don't get me wrong, but
they missed him.
I think they did. Hunter moved there out of necessity. I think they preferred him to be on the inside. He's a better run guy they talked about his numbers. I'm pretty sure he was a better run guy than a pass blocker. So it'd be interesting if they go a different route with left tackle or what, because I think Hunter's taken one of those spots. Just don't know which one.
Yeah, they really had some really decent success in the offensive line.
Yeah. So most of those, like the only ones on the list, I would instead of putting a number on it, I would say Cage is probably the top priority for there to bring back, then just so you can settle it up and be solid for next season. Any thoughts, or do we want to jump to D-line quickly just so we can run through this as quick as we can?
Let's go to D-line.
Jared Brinkman, Jake Ceresna, Robbie Smith, and Woody Barron. I'd say Ceresna is probably the highest on that list with an 8 or a 9.
Yeah, Ceresna's
he is. Absolutely.
Newly followed me on Twitter and Instagram, Jake Ceresna.
Ceresna and Robbie Smith because he's a Canadian. Brinkman might be one of those guys on the outs because
he was really good at the home opener though, when he had the belly.
He was fantastic. He got hurt. Other guys stepped up. Now, what could change? I know Ralph Hawley is
working out for Tennessee. No,
he waited a workout in Tennessee, so they're gonna probably wait and see if guys get moved. But I do think like Robbie Smith and Jake Ceresna are probably the 2 guys they're gonna want to bring back from that group.
Yeah, because Ceresna's impact, like when you see it and feel it, it's not just quiet; it's loud and out there.
Very.
And then Robbie Smith, shout out the school, 10 minutes for me, Wilfrid Laurier. From there, almost some runners up in the Vanier Cup too. So I think those guys are the top priorities. And then I think Brinkman and Barron are just more numbers games casualties. Unless it's like Duke, though, where it's like, hey, unless you come back and you know and you understand your role, where it's like, hey, we've done this. And then linebackers, obviously, we know who the big one is. That's a 10 out of 10. You can't let that man get out the door. I'm sorry for everything. Not for just on field, but for off field too. That man is the leader of leaders in the locker room in Wynton McManus. Fraser Sopik and Malik Clements, which I'll say Sopik and Kassar for special teams are 2 aces I think you got to really consider. I know Kassar's on the list, but like guys like that on special teams are really where you can help and show. And to also say the point you guys were saying earlier, CFL really is a 3-facet football game.
Yeah, I mean, Yeah, it really is a 3 fast game. We've known that. I will say, like, when McManus, I talked to him. You and I were there.
Yeah.
He wants to be back. It's just the business side of it. That's going to be the big one. Can they convince him to look away from other offers? That's going to be tough to ask, right? Because
Is it more about your legacy or your wallet at this point, really?
I think he's already established his legacy. That's the other thing too. That
You know what I meant, like a CFL legacy as a whole, like where it's just like, do you want to set yourself like you can set yourself up financial? Basic. I'm gonna walk back and reword what I just said. You've established your legacy? Do you want to continue to do that, or do you want to more or less go somewhere where, hey, you've won 3? Yeah, he's won 3. He was on that Calgary team in 18, correct?
Yeah.
So he's won 3 Grey Cups. You want to go for number 4, or do you want to go somewhere else and maybe, throw the dice a little bit? That's my big thing with him. But I think at the end of the day, I think it's going to be a quiet day in February or March, and we see a photo of a toothpick appear on social media somewhere. And that's when Argo fans know, are we keeping him or are we losing him?
He's as important as Kelly is to this team. He's the quarterback of the defense.
Yeah. You felt it when he was hurt this past summer.
He's the second most important player on this team. In my opinion, other than I know that people are going to think that Chad Kelly's not important because they won without him, but they just got by without him this year. Right? Yep. I think Win McManus on that defense is no doubt there's nobody more important.
Also, if you want to know how important Kelly is to the Argonauts, go listen to Ryan Dinwiddie's speech from the victory parade last Tuesday.
Mm-hmm.
That's the thing with that too. Defensive backs. There's defensive back and there's specialists. There's John Haggerty, which the Aussie. We'll see what happens there. But then for defensive backs, I'm probably going to butcher a couple of these names: Tunde Adeleke, Deshaun Amos, Kerfala Exium, Tavares McFadden, Robert Priester, Royce Metier, and Jamie Harry. I'm going to give the 3 most important ones, and that's Amos, McFadden, and Metier. Not to discredit Priester. Priester would be number 4 on that list.
Amos and Metier for sure. McFadden, they let him go. When they brought him back, it helped stabilize things. I do think Metier and Amos are the 2 highest on the priorities. I know Metier had a down year. It wasn't his best year as the year before that.
He is a bit of a leader, though. That's the thing. He's starting.
He is very important. Canadian player too. Those guys are valued so much, and again, local kid too.
That's the other thing too, because like Brissett, he's from the GTA. He's from Brampton. The big thing with McFadden is too. I think McFadden's in that coaxy conversation where it is like a 5 out of 10, where it's like, will someone else see? Hey, we know he's been cut. We know he was cut from Toronto. He was cut from Ottawa. Then he was brought back to Toronto. But will they see what he did in his time from getting cut? This guy can come in and help our defense. So that's where I view Tavares McFadden. Meanwhile, I think they can get like a guy like Amos and Metier kind of quarterback that secondary, and then you get a guy like Robert Priester and Benji Franklin, who are amazing complementary pieces to those people, to the team. Yeah.
As important as it is that players played well in the Grey Cup.
Yeah.
The success of the Toronto Argonauts and the players on the Toronto Argonauts, the sample size is a little bigger. So, there's some guys that maybe didn't show up at the Grey Cup that'll still have high value to other teams, because of the way they played over the long haul as opposed to just for one game. There's always that extra little thing where, the Arbuckle effect, right? He won a Grey Cup. Oh, maybe he's better than we thought. You'll get that
in the Grey Cup.
Yeah, you'll get that'll happen. Some players, shoot the lights out in the Grey Cup. And sometimes I'm just saying, buyer beware, that just because a guy has a great Grey Cup doesn't mean he's going to have a great season for you. So that's where, they really have to pay attention.
The greatest example of that too, and this is something David can really vouch for, because obviously besides covering the CFL, he's very invested in the NHL. There's always a lot of guys who have a great Stanley Cup playoffs or a great Stanley Cup final, and they get signed to big tickets because of that small sample size. So I completely agree with you there with a guy like Priester, where it'd be great to have him back, don't get me wrong, but if you pay him based off of what he did in that little sample size, that's where it can come back and haunt you down the road. Not to discredit him as a player, because obviously, look, if I was guarding him one-on-one or he was guarding me one-on-one, it would be a little bit of a different story. Also, I don't know why, but this little gear right here I thought was a smudge on my computer, so I just went like that for a split second.
All good.
Yeah.
It's not a smudge?
No, it's not a smudge. It's my it's the crank for my microphone so I can hold it up right. Hear me.
I do think when you look at, success is something that you have to take it in as a team thing and not just always a player thing. But I do think like Deshaun Amos was one of my he was up there for nominees for Argos Defensive Player of the Year, right? He's one of those guys that can change the game with the play, and so I again, you got to be very wary about how much you're putting towards certain players, but he's one of those guys where you got to make sure when you have a guy that works, and look, this new defensive coordinator coming in knows these guys.
Yeah.
So he'll know if these guys are worth keeping around, if he can work with them, if they're worth keeping around as well.
Mm-hmm.
So one other thing I want to say before we wrap, I have a couple things I got to say. But one is, though, I've always been kind of weary because like how in the NFL free agency starts like a month after the Super Bowl is done. I think there's a little bit to it with the CFL where you have about a 3-month window to really decide on some guys where it's like, hey, right away, you don't have to think, oh, hey, we just won, but we got to figure for this. You have the time. You can go back. You can review the film. You can review the player, just like the ID. When I say ID card, like what did they bring throughout the year, not just during the playoffs. Bringing in new coaches, the coach can watch the film and say, hey, I want this guy as my corner. I want this guy as my safety. I want this guy as my, just spread them all throughout the field. I can do this with player X, player Y, player Z. And then obviously there's going to be the guys that Ryan's going to want too. So we'll see. We'll see if there's a meeting at local. Ryan, keep us in the loop for that. But and the other fun thing too is I love the fact that the schedule is going to be out probably in a couple of weeks. But before we wrap up, is there any like not a crazy take, but anything like anything unsuspected you think you could see happening in the CFL offseason, or anything you would like to see happen this offseason?
Oh, a surprise?
Yeah.
Dickinson moving up to the GM's office and hiring a coach to fill all those empty spaces.
I don't know if he wants to give.
I know what you're saying. I agree with you, David. We're talking.
I know if you're looking for the wow factor, that's a pretty good wow factor, I would say.
Yeah. It's the hey, I made this mess. You got to clean it up.
Yeah, well, or he's saying I made a mess. Let's bring somebody in here who can start, because that's the opportunity that Calgary has now. That he goes up to being a GM and realizes that, as David and I agree, and I think you do too, CFL, you can't be GM and coach. It's too much. I know you want to save some money in the cap, but
that's why I think that article that dropped from Third Down about Ryan Dinwiddie wanting to be a GM, I don't buy too much into it. I think it's more or less he just probably has a lot of say in player personnel to where Pinball trusts him. I don't think he'll ever be a full-time GM, considering too he's also head coach and offensive coordinator. I just think it's more or less he's not just going to take his word and just be like, yeah, he's going to take his word and be like, okay, yeah, this is why we got to sign player X and player Y.
What's the reason why they take on both jobs? What's the reason why Jones took on all those jobs? So that he could justify how much he gets paid, right? Well, what's wrong with just paying a guy? What's wrong with just paying Dinwiddie and saying, yeah, I want
wear one hat when you can wear three and do a bad job at two of them?
So I see Dinwiddie as a smart enough guy that he's going to, he's a team player. Yeah. I can see him taking on responsibility, saying thank you for that responsibility. And then when the negotiation process comes, the Argos have lost a couple of people, they lost an assistant GM. Margie. So, they were paying him, right? They were paying him. So, there's a little bonus there for Dinwiddie if he wants it. And he wants to be, I don't even think he'd care about the assistant GM tag. I think he would just be happy with having input.
Yeah, I don't think he wants the tag. I just think he appreciates being a part of it. And maybe, you know what? There's a difference between being a coach and a GM. Coach is very immersed in the game plan every day. I think that's something he transitions to when feels like he needs to step away from coaching and not have that on his plate 7 days a week. I think that's when you see that move happen.
And the necessity for the difference of the person having two different people to go to. When you go to the coach, you're talking about one thing. When you go into the GM, you're talking about something else, sorry. And you can't go to the coach to do both. I don't think you can, So, it's just by virtue of the tasks that both take on. It'd be too difficult. It's too difficult in the Canadian Football League to have a player talk to both of them as if he's talking to two people when they need to talk to two people. Because contracts are really tricky in the Canadian Football League. You sign a contract. Ask Fajardo about $200,000 that he agreed, was coming his way. That the coach doesn't want to be a part of that conversation. I know I wouldn't if I was a coach.
You really think Jason? If I could put a thing on it, I would. If you could give Jason Moss truth serum, he would absolutely say, "No, I don't want anything to do with that." Like with having the conversation, but not paying him.
Yeah, no. That privately as well, because publicly GMs are expected by fans to do certain things. The coaches are expected to do certain things, and when you blur that line, it's no fun being a fan, because it's just you know who to blame if you don't have the right players. You know who to blame if the team's not playing well because they don't have a system.
That's exactly it. It's so much of a microcosm of a huge organism that is a pro football team, especially in this instance, a Canadian pro football team. But anyway, guys, CFL offseason's in high gear. We'll be around to talk. Don't worry about it. You and your Americans on your American Thanksgiving. But for myself, David Morisuti, Candid Frank Stanishi, excuse me. I'm Griff. Guys, we love football, don't we?